The Dualshock Controller was a huge deal for the PlayStation 1 back in the day. It came out in November 20th of 1997, and PlayStation fans were super stoked for this. We had a D-pad the whole time until that point, so it was nice to compete with the Nintendo 64, and we got a joystick of our own with games. Being able to move in just more than 8 directions was pretty groundbreaking at the time. This is pretty standard today, but still a cool thing that came out back in the 90s. Unfortunately, the DualShock control doesn't support all games on the system, only really games that came out after 97. I came up with a list of 8 games that I chose that are definitely good games that make good use of the DualShock control functions. All these games at least use something to do with the DualShock controller, which I know there's going to be games that people are expecting on this list that won't be here, so if your game that you're looking for is not on this list, I do apologize. But without further ado, let's dive into this list of games that use analog functions very well for the PS1. Number 1. I think everyone watching this video knew this game was going to make the list, but Ape Escape is for sure a great demonstration of what the DualShock controller can do. There's not really a game like this either. It uses the left stick and the right stick the whole time. The left stick obviously moves you in very good precise directions, and the right stick actually is your attack button. Now normally this would be a camera function that you would use for the right stick, but your X, square, triangle, circle buttons are your gadgets that you select. You select them, and you use the right stick in the direction you want to use it. It's a really cool idea, and it's definitely cumbersome at first, but once you start using it, it's actually pretty cool, and it works well with this game. I would definitely say that this control scheme is the reason to why this game is so unique and so fun to play, because it's just fun just going around catching a bunch of monkeys and using gadgets and doing some platforming, and Nintendo probably was jealous of this game back in the day. So if there's one game on this list that I definitely recommend using DualShock controls, well, Ape Escape. There's not a game like it. It has its own control scheme. Nothing can mimic that. So definitely check this one out if you're a huge PS1 fan and you've never played it before.
Yes!
Number 2. Silent Hill, another game that doesn't really need much of an introduction. I actually just reviewed this game in my last video, and Silent Hill definitely makes good use of the DualShock controls. The left stick is what you'll be using, the right stick doesn't do anything unfortunately, but the left stick, I was very surprised at how sensitive the controls were, like a good sensitive. Like if you barely nudge on it, you barely walk, and that's a really nice touch for a game in 99. It was very, very uncommon. So it was really cool to see that, as well as the vibration function. If you're walking around, you're going to feel the controller vibrate a lot when you're stepping and such, and apparently if your health gets low in the menu, you can feel the vibration from that too. It's just a cool little touch to make the game a lot more interesting and enjoyable. Silent Hill alone is a must-play. If you like survival horror games, you gotta play this one. If you love Resident Evil, Clock Tower, whatever it is, Silent Hill is great, and it makes good use of the DualShock controls. Number 3. Crash Team Racing is one of my all-time favorites on the original PlayStation. Yeah, it's a racing game, it's pretty simple to play, a competitor to Mario Kart, but in my opinion, I think it's better than Mario Kart 64 in every possible way. Crash Team Racing originally came out in 1999, and it does have DualShock support. Nothing too revolutionary, but you can use the left stick to move, and I feel like that, instead of a D-pad, definitely makes precision turns when you're playing the game. And you can get those drift boosts along the way too. You can definitely play this game with just the D-pad. I've done it before, it works, but something about the left stick just makes it feel just right when you play this game, because Crash Team Racing is an awesome game. You got an adventure mode, you got a Grand Prix mode, and you got a versus mode, and it's just a ton of fun, and you have unlockable characters. Crash Team Racing is a no-brainer. Everyone likes this game who's played it, so if you haven't played this game, and you want something that uses the left stick on the DualShock controller, well, Crash Team Racing is a good pick. Number 4. C12 Final Resistance is a late-release PS1 game developed by Sony of Europe. And this game is a third-person shooter, and on the surface, you look at it, you're probably just thinking it's another military shooter kind of deal, and I understand if you think that, but there's a lot more to this game than what you think. This game uses DualShock support very, very well. The left stick moves you in very good precision, just like Silent Hill did, and the right stick actually moves your camera. I know, holy crap, that's so crazy. But yeah, it moves your camera, and that was a pretty big deal for this console. Controlling this game, it feels a lot like the next generation, a PS2 game, which would make sense of when it was released. But overall, this is just a pretty fun game to play, and it's very enjoyable. And you can see that Sony just wasn't giving up on the console just yet, 2 years after the release of the PS2. C12 Final Resistance, a pretty cool third-person shooter that uses DualShock controls pretty well. Number 5. I never played the Colony Wars games growing up. I definitely heard about them. They look kind of like Star Wars or Star Trek. But Colony Wars 3, Red Sun, I did just pick this one up, and this indeed supports DualShock controls. And this one here, similar to Crash Team Racing, nothing super revolutionary, but you're in a first-person view flight combat kind of game here, and when you fly around shooting at stuff, you can use the left stick, and it feels very good and crisp whenever you turn. It's like very good. Like, it's not like D-pad controls where it kind of like turns you too quickly. It's just perfect with the left stick, and it helps out with this game. Also, Colony Wars 3 Red Sun's a pretty dang good game. If you play it, the cinematics are pretty impressive, as well as the gameplay. It reminds me of stuff like Rogue Squadron, but in a first-person view, and I do like that quite a bit. If you like sci-fi and flight combat games, Colony Wars is a no-brainer. It was a big series back in the day on the PS1, and Colony Wars 3 is one you should definitely check out. Number 6. Spyro Year of the Dragon, like Ape Escape, a good 3D platformer on its own, it does also support DualShock controls. You just use the left stick to move in any direction you want, and it works pretty well that way. Now, I will say this, all 3 Spyro games do support the DualShock controls, just a FYI. I just chose Year of the Dragon. Let's be honest, it's the best one of the 3, in my opinion, but whichever Spyro game you prefer, it works with all 3. Unfortunately, it doesn't use the right stick at all. I thought it did, but it technically doesn't. You still turn the camera with L2 and R2, but nonetheless, the game plays perfectly fine with just this left stick. Spyro Year of the Dragon is definitely a must-play. It's one of the best 3D platformers on the console. You can't go wrong with any of the 3 games, but this one is for sure the best. So, if you want another game to add to your collection that uses the sticks, this is definitely one I would check out. Spyro is definitely one you don't want to miss. Number 7. I love me a good first-person shooter, especially from the 90s, and Quake 2 is definitely no exception. Quake 2 obviously supports DualShock controls, and nothing too revolutionary, but it definitely helps with the left stick being able to move you pretty precisely, and just playing through the game and scrolling through the levels, shooting around, definitely feels nice. Quake 2 is also just a fun game in general. If you like old games from the 90s like Power Slave, Doom, or Alien Trilogy, this is definitely one you gotta play. I wanted to include games like Medal of Honor or Medal of Honor Underground on this list, but I felt like Quake 2 just kind of felt better as I was playing it, and to me, I just think Quake 2 is a better game than Medal of Honor, which that could be, debatable, but nonetheless, if you're looking for a good first-person shooter with some analog controls, Quake 2 is a good candidate for that. Number 8. When I was researching to find games that were compatible with analog controls, Jammer Lammy definitely surprised me. This game was developed by Nonishan and published by Sony, basically the same guys who made the Parappa the Rapper games. In fact, it is a spin-off of Parappa the Rapper. Like Parappa the Rapper, Jammer Lammy is also a rhythm game. There's a lot of cinematics in this game, and it's like watching a cartoon. It's actually pretty nice, and good animation as well. But with the gameplay, you have to hit the buttons corresponding on the screen. Sounds very easy. Believe me, it is not easy at all. Especially if you're playing on something that's not the original hardware, because it seems like there's a delay in the input commands, possibly. But I do have this physically, and I did play it, and one cool thing you can do with the analog controls, you can use the left stick to do an effector on your guitar when you're playing. You can hit the select button, I believe, before you start, and you can choose an effector for when you do the song, and you use the left stick to go in, a random direction, and it'll do a certain effect with what you chose. Nothing to do with the gameplay exactly, doesn't affect it, it's more just cosmetics, but it's still a cool touch they just included something like this, just to enhance the experience of playing this game. Not to mention, right before you're about to go up, the game controller will vibrate just slightly. That will notify you to let you know when to hit the buttons on the screen. I thought it was super interesting to find out that this game supported Dualshock controls, so I definitely wanted to throw it on this list, because it surprised me incredibly. But Jammer Lammy, it's definitely a learning curve kind of game, just like Parappa the Rapper. You gotta learn how to play it and hit the notes precisely according to the screen and the music. But if you like rhythm games, well, definitely check this game out. It's definitely kind of cool.
Okay, that was pretty good. You can go through now.
Okay, gotta move on.
And there you have it. Those are 8 games that use analog controls pretty well for the PlayStation 1. There's plenty more that could have made it on this list. These are just ones that stuck out to me the most. I'm sure I missed some games that easily could have been talked about, and if I did miss something that should be worth mentioning, definitely leave a comment below, because I'd love to know if there was something I missed. That way for the future, if I decide to do something like this again, I'll throw it on there and talk about it. In today's time, these kind of controls are just, what we have now. Like, this is with everything. But back in the day, during the PS1 N64 era, this was revolutionary at the time. Having 2 sticks on your controller, it was just freaking mind-blowing back then. But the DualShock Controller, it started something really cool back then, and it's still going today with every PlayStation console that comes out. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoy this kind of content, be sure to give it a like. You got something to say? Leave a comment down below. And of course, if you want to see more content like this in the future, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks again for watching. Take it easy.